What's going on, guys? It's me, Zach, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. In this one, I'm going to go over every single game this week outside of Thursday night's matchup with the Chargers and the Chiefs. I've been sort of behind this week just because I was traveling this last weekend, so this video will be coming out Thursday night or Friday morning rather than probably Thursday morning going forward, just so that you guys can make sure that I include Thursday night games as well. But for the sake of this one, I'll be covering all the games other than Thursday night game, and I'll just go over every single player that's fantasy relevant and sort of give you my breakdown as to whether or not they're going to be worth playing this week. Some of it might end up being pretty rapid fire because obviously I can't talk about these games for several hours. It could easily do that, but you guys don't want to watch a several hour long video, and I don't want to spend that long making one. So it could be rapid fire. If you guys do end up with any specific start sit questions, do feel free to ask me in the comments. I love interacting with you guys. And if for whatever reason I can't get back to your comment, you can always refer to the website. My rankings are posted there every Wednesday night, so you can take a look at those and use those for your reference as well. You might disagree with them, but they might be a nice benchmark for you to use as well. If this is your first time on the channel, I do want to thank you for stopping by. Please do feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell so you get notification when we put out videos. I do a minimum of 3 videos every week, but I've been hoping to sort of be more and more up and involved this season, so might even go above and beyond that, but you can count on at least 3 videos every week, and I'll do my best to help you win your league. I love doing this. It's some of my favorite stuff, and I'm going to spend so much time thinking about it myself. I might as well try and help you guys as well. So with that, let's get into the first game. The first game we're going to go over here is the Patriots at the Steelers. I think that this one's pretty easy. I think you're starting Ramondre and Damian Harris, especially with the Patriots putting Ty Montgomery on IR this week. So you're going to see a bump in both of their passing game involvement. So I think they're both about low end running back to high end flex options this week. So feel free to start them. You might have better options. They're by no means must starts, but I'm happy starting both Patriots running backs. And that's about all I'm happy starting on the Patriots side. Moving over to the Steelers side of the ball, you're obviously starting Najee Harris if he plays. If for whatever reason Najee's been sort of lying to us and Najee does miss this game, then I think Jalen Warren is a fine low end running back 2, high end flex play as well. And obviously you're going to start Deontay Johnson and Pat Freiermuth. You probably don't have better options than either one of those two, so you're probably stuck starting them. I would stray from starting any Patriots pass catcher this week. We really didn't see much involvement from any of them. Jacoby Myers looked pretty good, but it looked like Devontae Parker was the red zone target, and I don't know, this Patriots offense just really couldn't move the ball much last week, and I'm more than okay waiting a week and waiting to see something out of this offense before I really invest in any of their receiving options. So I'm going to pass on all those guys this week, and I'll also sit the remaining receiving options for Pittsburgh. Claypool was kind of oddly involved. I believe he got 6 carries last week, so if they continue to use him like that, he did have 1 on the goal line, so a world exists where Claypool sort of becomes a pretty consistent low-end flex play. I am starting him in one of my leagues, but it's a really deep team, 12-team league, so sort of have to do so, and he's my wide receiver 4 in that team, and I'm still not thrilled about it. So in general, I think you're sitting Claypool this week, and obviously you're going to sit George Pickens until you see something out of him. Next game we're going to go over here is the Panthers at the Giants. I think this is one of the easiest games to talk about, really. I think you're obviously starting Christian McCaffrey and DJ Moore on the Panthers side of the ball. Some of you might think you should start Robbie Anderson, but I need to see it one more week. Take out his 75-yard touchdown last week. He really didn't do much, and he was really bad all of last year. He flirted with retirement in the offseason and all that, so I'm really hesitant to put Robbie Anderson in my starting lineup here. If you're in a really deep league, I could see you pulling the trigger on it, but for me, Robbie Anderson's a sit until I see it at least a couple more weeks. And then obviously you're starting Saquon Barkley on the Giants side of the ball. I don't think anybody else is really startable in this matchup. We don't really know what to expect out of the Giants pass catchers. They're sort of inexplicably not using Kadarius Toney. I believe Richie James led the team in targets last week. So I'm sitting all these Giants pass catchers. And obviously you're not going to start either the tight ends or quarterbacks in this matchup. So that one's pretty easy. Next game we're going to talk about here is the Jets at the Browns. This is going to be another pretty gross, low-scoring game, but I think you can sort of start Michael Carter and Breece Hall in this one. I think that it's pretty reasonable to expect Joe Flacco to continue to dump it all down to the running backs. I believe the running backs in New York combined for 20 targets last week, which is absolutely insane. So I think you can reasonably count on both of these guys as low-end flex options. Neither of them are must-starts, and I'd hope you have better options, but I think they're flex viable, so I'm listing them as starts here. I would expect the overall workload for these two to slowly shift to Breece Hall, especially as the season goes on. So every single week, I'm going to be sort of projecting Breece Hall a little bit over Michael Carter, but do believe right now I have Michael Carter ranked one spot ahead of Breece Hall in my weekly rankings. I'm also comfortable starting Elijah Moore this week. He looked really good again last week, and he had a touchdown called back because of a penalty, so he was just a penalty away from a much bigger week last week. And then you're going to start both Browns running backs. Kareem Hunt scored the 2 touchdowns last week, and Nick Chubb looked really good, of course. So you're starting both of those two. And then really beyond that, I think you're sitting everyone else. I mentioned Amari Cooper as one of my sits of the week last week. Pretty happy to do that again this week. And I think I'm also going to sit Donovan Peoples-Jones. I know he had the 12 targets, or 11 targets, 6 for 60 yards, but I just don't want to trust any of these Browns pass catchers. Jacoby Brissett's just bad, and none of these guys have separated themselves enough for me to trust them. And then I'm also going to sit all their Jets pass catchers as well, outside of Elijah Moore. Garrett Wilson's definitely got upside, but he's a guy I'm going to want to wait and see him do it before I trust him. And Corey Davis is sort of on his way out. So that's about all for this one. Moving on to Colts at Jaguars. I think you've got some pretty obvious ones here on the Colts side of the ball. You're obviously going to start Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman every single week. It did pop up this Thursday that Michael Pittman missed practice due to an injury, so certainly keep an eye on that. I don't think there's necessarily a replacement for the Colts if Michael Pittman does miss this game, but just make sure you don't get stuck with him in your lineup. Check back on that later in the week. But I don't think him missing would elevate any of the other Colts pass catchers. None of them stood out to me, so I'm happy passing on all their Colts pass catchers as well. I think you can sort of play Nyheim Hines in the flex again this week. He was pretty involved as a pass catcher and on the ground, and if you're in a league that rewards kick return yards, he is their punt returner and could certainly do something there. So I think he's going to be a nice low-end flex play, especially in deeper leagues for about the whole season. He's going to obviously have more upside in matchups where they might be trailing, but I think he's involved enough that you can use him as a flex. I've got a league where I've got Jonathan Taylor, and I sort of want hero RB in that one, so I've been playing Hines as my RB2 in that one, and I don't hate it because the rest of my team's so stacked, so I can see that Nyheim Hines as a starter. On the Jaguar side of the ball, I think you can start Christian Kirk. Obviously, I think it's about time we sort of just rank him as a low-end wide receiver 2 the rest of the season. He's the clear wide receiver 1 in Jacksonville, and he's a good player in a game that I don't expect them to really struggle too much to move the ball in, so I think Christian Kirk's going to be great. Moving on to the running backs to Jacksonville, I think you can start both James Robinson and Travis Etienne. They're both going to be sort of along the same lines as a bunch of these other RB2s and low and high end flex plays for me. I don't love starting either of them, but I think for both of them you might have to. You probably have to start Etienne if you drafted him, so I'd say start Etienne, and maybe you have a better option if you have James Robinson, but he's always got a good shot at a touchdown this week, and he looked really good, so I'm comfortable starting him, but I don't need to get him into my lineup. And the sits here are pretty easy. I'm going to sit both quarterbacks in this one. There's not really a tight end I'm interested in. I know some people might be sort of rolling out Evan Ingram as a flyer or a streamer each week, but I don't think this is a good week for Ingram, and I'd much rather not start him this week. And Zay Jones is a name to keep an eye on, so that's why I have him listed here as a sit, but he did get 9 targets last week. I added him on waivers in a league or two this last week, so he's a guy I'm worth paying attention to, but I don't trust him enough to start him yet this week. Moving on to the Dolphins at the Ravens. This one's another pretty easy one for me. I think you're obviously going to start Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle every single week, and I'm very comfortable starting Chase Edmonds as well on a weekly basis. And then on the Ravens side of the ball, you're going to start Lamar, Mark Andrews, and Rashad Bateman. I think that I'm pretty comfortable sitting Mostert and Tua. Mostert wasn't as involved as I actually thought he would be, and Tua just doesn't offer enough upside for me to be really looking to start him when there aren't really any buys. So unless for whatever reason maybe you got Tua as your backup and you lost Dak, I'm not starting Tua until there's a bye week necessity. And I'm also going to pass on all of the Ravens running backs this week. Even if Dobbins suits up, I'm going to want to wait and see him perform well until I trust him. And despite the fact that Devin Duvernay had a pretty good week last week, he only caught 4 passes. I mean, it was even 4 targets. 2 touchdowns is just not going to be consistent for him. So I got to see Duvernay be more involved over the course of a couple more weeks before I trust him in my starting lineup. Moving on to the Buccaneers at the Saints. This one's another pretty easy one for me. I think you're obviously starting Leonard Fournette if he plays. I know he's been dealing with a little bit of an injury that he left the game at the end of last week, but I think he's going to play this week. And obviously, if he plays, you've got to start him. He's going to catch a ton of passes, and he looked really good last week. So I'm starting Leonard Fournette. And I think you can start Mike Evans and Julio Jones this week. I think that Julio looked as close to himself as he's been in a while, and they're going to be without Godwin. So Julio's going to act as the clear number 2 wide receiver on an offense that's led by Tom Brady. So he's certainly worth starting this week. And along those lines, you're obviously starting Tom Brady this week. If you have him, you probably don't have a better option. This could be a down week for Brady. He does struggle against the Saints, so I'm not in love with it, but I think you're starting Brady unless for whatever reason all of these receivers for Tampa Bay don't suit up. I want to say their top 5 receivers were listed on the injury report on Wednesday or Thursday's practice, so keep an eye on that, but I think you got to start Brady. And then on the Saints side of the ball, I'm only really starting Kamara and Michael Thomas. As good as Olave and Jarvis Landry looked last week, I just don't want to trust them in my lineup until I see it a little bit more. I think that Michael Thomas is only going to be more involved this week, so I only really trust him. And I'm going to sit all the tight ends in this game, including Taysom Hill, if you want to count him. Taysom Hill's sort of been a popular topic, but it's too fluky. I don't want to trust him at my tight end position. And I'm going to sit Jameis Winston and Russell Gage in this one. I didn't see Russell Gage be involved enough, and I just think you can do better than Jameis Winston this week. I'd much rather play guys like Derek Carr and Kirk Cousins. So, yep. Moving on to the Commanders at the Lions. This is a game that I think is going to be kind of surprisingly high scoring, and with that, there's going to be a lot of people that I think you can start in this one. I think on the Commanders side of the ball, I think you're starting Antonio Gibson along with all 3 receivers there. I don't think you need to get Curtis Samuel or Jahan Dotson into your lineup, but I think they're both flex viable, especially in a game that I think could be a shootout. And on the Lions side of the ball, I'm certainly starting Amon-Ra St. Brown and DeAndre Swift every single week. You're probably starting TJ Hawkinson every single week because he's going to be a top 7 tight end, so you have to do that. And DJ Chark is a guy that I think you can start in this one as well. I think he's going to have plenty of air yards and certainly just a nice kind of a boom or bust flex option for you, and he's a guy that I think I'm comfortable starting. And I'm also starting Carson Wentz in this one. I think I have him ranked as a top 12 quarterback this week. It's a really juicy matchup, and the Lions are going to put up a decent amount of points. I want to say they're even favored in this game, which is, I think, the first time they've been favored in like 2 or 3 years. So that's really exciting. I think that the Lions are actually building something good here, but I do think that Carson Wentz is going to be a nice start. Even if they do lose that game, it's going to be a high-scoring game. But with that, I think that you're only really sitting J.D. McKissick because I think this game's going to be close enough that you're not going to get a ton of passing volume there. I'm going to sit Jamal Williams unless we find out that the injury that DeAndre Swift is nursing is a little more serious. And then I'm going to sit Logan Thomas just for one more week. I'd like to see him come back and be a little more involved than he was last week. I want to say he had 3 for 45. That's pretty good in his return from an injury that I really thought might be career-ending for him, but I don't want to trust Logan Thomas in my lineups just yet. Moving on to the Seahawks at the 49ers, I think that you're pretty obviously starting DK Metcalf, just given where you drafted him. You sort of have to. And then you're going to start Rashad Penny this week. Keep an eye on how involved Ken Walker is this week and see if he does end up still having that lion's share of the work. Because if it does become more of a split, this offense isn't going to be good enough to support 2 of them. But Penny did look good in week 1. I think you can start him again this week. And then on the 49ers side of the ball, especially with George Kittle missing, I think you can pretty comfortably start Deebo and Brandon Ayuk. It's going to be a pretty consolidated target share, so those 2 are both starts for me, and then I think you can start Jeff Wilson and Trey Lance. The Seahawks gave up, I want to say, 5.3 yards per carry to the Broncos last week, so Wilson could do pretty well there, and Trey Lance is a guy who's going to get enough floor on the ground that I think he's a low-end QB1 this week. I don't think you need to start Trey Lance if you have a better option. You don't need to force him into your lineup, but he's certainly worth starting if you have him. And then I'm going to sit Tyler Lockett this week. The Seahawks didn't really look to push the ball downfield at all last week, and that's sort of been where Lockett really makes his money and really pays off in fantasy is those big plays, and I just don't see it happening. I'm going to sit all the tight ends in this matchup. I know the Seahawks tight ends sort of combined for a really explosive game last week, but I think it might be sort of too hard to ever predict which one of them matters. And then I'm going to sit Kenneth Walker this week as well. Keep an eye on how involved he is. I think he's a really talented player, but I'm not going to trust him in his first game ever. So, yeah. Next game on the docket here is the Falcons at the Rams. I think for the Falcons, it's pretty easy. You're going to start Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Cordarrelle Patterson. Keep an eye on Cordarrelle Patterson. I think that his workload was pretty inflated due to the Damian Williams injury to start the game last week. So you might see his total touches go down from 25 to 15 this week, but I think he's involved enough that he's still a low-end RB2, high-end flex play this week. And then on the Rams side of the ball, you're obviously starting Darrell Henderson. I want to say, led the NFL in terms of running back snap share last week. So he's the clear RB1 for the Rams. You're going to start Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp this week because they're going to have, I think the Rams in general are going to have a really strong bounce back week. So I think you can really comfortably start Matthew Stafford, Kupp, and Allen Robinson. I think Allen Robinson's in line for a really, really involved week. They're going to make a point of making sure he's been involved in the offense. And sort of similar to what we just saw with Mike Williams this week, I think that they're going to realize that he's an important part of their offense, and it's important to make sure he feels involved. So he's going to see a pretty healthy target share. I expect them to get Robinson going early, and he's going to have a big week this week. Some sits here. I think you're obviously going to sit Cam Akers. You got to wait until you see him actually do something before you trust him in your lineup. And as much as I think he's going to be a decent streaming option at some point in the season, you've got to sit Marcus Mariota. He's just not going to be a top 12 guy, but maybe in a week with his buys, you can put him in. Next game here is Cardinals at Raiders. I think that this is going to be another really high scoring game. We saw last week the Cardinals really just couldn't defend anybody. They've got a really bad defense. They don't have any pass rush, and their secondary is just not it. So this could be a really high scoring game because the Cardinals are going to give up a lot of points, and they can certainly keep up with Kyler at the helm. So you're obviously going to start Kyler, Connor, and Marquise Brown every single week. I don't really think there's anybody else that's a guaranteed starter for you. I think you can start Zach Ertz as well, just because tight end position is so thin that I think he's worth starting, but I don't love it. But then moving on to the Raiders, I think you can start Josh Jacobs this week. I think he's got a really great shot at getting a touchdown, and I just think this is going to be a really high scoring game, and I think that you can count on Josh Jacobs to get 15 total touches, and a world exists where he falls in the end zone even twice. And then you're going to start all of the passing game for the Raiders this week. You're going to start Carr, Adams, Waller, and Renfro. You're not going to start anybody else, obviously, but all of those guys are going to be great. And as far as sits, there's not really anybody notable that I would say you need to sit, but really any of the other pass catching options for the Cardinals, I'm not looking at them. There's Greg Dortch, there's AJ Green, there's Andy Isabella, Rondale Moore if he's back, but I'm sitting all those guys. I'm not starting any other running backs in this game, but I think this is going to be a really high scoring game and one where you could find a lot of fantasy value. The next game here is the Texans at the Broncos. This one's pretty easy for me, especially on the Texans side of the ball. You're only going to start Brandon Cooks this week. I know Rex Burkhead had a pretty decent week this week, but I don't want to trust Rex Burkhead at all. They've mentioned that they want to get Dameon Pierce more involved, but I don't want to start him until I see that either. So for me, you're just starting Brandon Cooks. And then on the Broncos side of the ball, you're going to start everybody. The Broncos are going to be really pissed off about last week. They're going to bounce back in a big way this week, and they're going to blow out the Texans. It's going to be really easy. You're going to see Russ dominate in the first half, and then this running game sort of put him away. So you can start Russ, Javonte, Sutton, Williams, Javonte, Sutton, Judy, Gordon, and Alberto. And really, you're not going to start anybody else. I know the Texans had O.J. Howard scored 2 touchdowns last week, but it was on like 7 total routes. So you're not going to start O.J. Howard, and Nico Collins is a nice prospect so far, but I'm not comfortable starting him at all. And like I've already touched on, I'm not starting any of the Texans running backs. Next game here is the Bengals at the Cowboys. I think this one's going to be sort of a blowout on the Bengals side of the ball. I expect the Bengals to bounce back this week and sort of just trounce the Cowboys, missing Dak Prescott. So I'm really comfortable starting Joe Burrow this week. I'm obviously starting Jamar Chase. You're obviously starting T. Higgins if he plays, and I think you can comfortably start Joe Mixon as well. On the Cowboys side of the ball, it's a little bit hairier, but I think you can start Ezekiel Elliott as a low-end RB2. I wouldn't expect big numbers out of him. Same thing with CeeDee Lamb. I think he's sort of a low-end wide receiver too. The talent's there, and Cooper Rush is okay, but they're not going to put up many points, and it's a sad state of affairs for the Cowboys right now. But again, the tight end position is so just barren that you got to start Dalton Schultz. But then you're going to sit Tony Pollard this week. He just didn't look great last week, and I don't see him improving with Cooper Rush at the quarterback position. As much as Hayden Hurst was pretty involved last week, I think you got to sit him, and you got to sit Tyler Boyd again. Unless T. Higgins does miss the game, then I think you can give Boyd and Hurst a bit of a bump and look at both of them. I would start Boyd if Higgins misses this game due to his concussion, and Hurst is sort of a nice tight end streamer. So moving on to the Sunday night game, we have the Chicago Bears at the Green Bay Packers. For me, I think I'm actually pretty comfortable starting Darnell Mooney, Cole Kmet, and David Montgomery on the Bears side of the ball. Darnell Mooney and Cole Kmet were super uninvolved last week, and I think a lot of people are really hesitant about that. And I totally get it if you want to wait one more week and just make sure you can see them perform before you trust them. But I think they're both going to bounce back this week. It was just a really strange game with the weather they had last week, and I expect them to be trailing in this one, so you can trust both those pass catchers. Montgomery, he had 17 carries and a few targets, so the volume's there. I do expect Khalil Herbert to maybe get a little bit more work, but David Montgomery can volume his way to low-end running back 2 production. Moving on to the Packers side of the ball, you're obviously going to start Aaron Rodgers this week. If you guys remember, he owned the Bears. He's going to be pissed off about last week. They started really slow week 1 last season and bounced back just fine. So I'm comfortable starting Aaron Rodgers. I think if Allen Lazard plays, you're going to start him. You're obviously going to start both running backs every single week for the Green Bay Packers. I think that there's a case to be made that A.J. Dillon is the running back to own in Green Bay, and I'm super excited about him. I've got him in several of my leagues and really happy about that. And another tight end I think you can stream going forward is Robert Tonyan. He's a guy that does have 10 touchdown upside in the season just because I think that Rodgers doesn't trust any of his pass catching options, and why would he? But Tunnion's a guy that's proven, so Tunnion's a guy you can play if you need to. And then I'm going to sit Justin Fields this week. I don't think it's going to be consistent enough for me to trust him going forward until I see it on a regular basis. And I'm going to sit Khalil Herbert. I just don't think that he gets enough volume just yet to trust him, but keep an eye on him. He could get more volume as the season goes on. And then I'm going to sit all other pass catchers. There's not really a receiver outside of Allen Lazard that separated himself for the Packers, so I don't trust any of them, and there's not a receiver other than Mooney on Chicago that I trust either. So the next game here is the Titans at the Bills. This will be the first game on Monday night. And for me, the Titans are pretty easy. I'm only starting Derrick Henry here. I need to see more out of everybody else before I trust them. I really like Kyle Phillips. I don't think he's somebody that I can trust starting yet. Traylon Burks is a guy that I think will have better weeks as the season goes on. But again, I need to see it before I start trusting him. And Robert Woods is a guy that I was pretty high on as being a nice, consistent flex option coming into the year. But he was just not involved. So I'm not starting any of the Titans other than Derrick Henry this week. Keep an eye on people going forward, but not worth starting any of those. And the Bills, you're sort of starting everybody involved in the pass catching, but not necessarily, I guess, because you're going to start Josh Allen, you're going to start Diggs and Gabe Davis, and I think you've got to start Dawson Knox just because of how thin the tight end position is. But because we saw a pretty even split between McKenzie and Crowder, I don't have them listed as starts this week. I sort of want to see one of those two separate themselves going forward. I think they are both like really low-end flex plays, so if you need them, you can go for it, but I don't trust it, and I'd like to just move on from them. And then I think you're going to sit Dontrell Hilliard here. I know he had the 2 touchdowns in week 1, but I don't think that's very repeatable. And then not listed here are all of the Bills running backs. I think they're all sits for me. I think you can start Singletary if you need to, but like we saw, he got a lot of the work last week. There was no Dalvin Cook, and he still put up like an RB36 finish, so the upside is just not there for any of these running backs, so I'm going to sit everybody outside of Allen and the 2 main receivers and their tight end for the Bills. And last but not least here, we've got the Vikings at the Eagles. I think this is going to be another one of those really high-scoring games. It's a game I'm really excited about, and because of that, I think I'm going to start almost everybody here. I'm going to start Kirk Cousins, Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson, and Adam Thielen in this one. And then on the Eagles side of the ball, you're going to start Jalen Hurts, Miles Sanders, A.J. Brown, and Dallas Goedert. The only real omission here, I think, is Devonta Smith in terms of players you might be considering starting. I know he's a really good player, and he did get 4 targets last week, but putting up a goose egg is just tough for me because I don't think he's an auto lock anyway. So I want to see Devonta Smith do something with this offense before I really trust him in my lineup again. I'm not trusting Nerf Smith until I see something out of him. And I think the rest of the Eagles running backs, like Gainwell and Boston Scott, are going to have their weeks, but it's going to be too hard to predict, so I'm happy sitting both of them as well. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.